He had everything: power, wealth, fame. But one night, a janitor found something inside his deaf daughter's ear that doctors around the world had missed. What came out didn't just change one life. It destroyed the lie they'd all been living. For 8 years, the millionaire's daughter lived in silence. Every doctor said the same thing: "There's nothing we can do." Her father spent millions, crossed oceans, begged the best specialists money could buy to look again. They all shook their heads. Tony Gardner was one of the richest men in New York. Private jets, marble penthouses, a view of the Hudson that could make anyone believe in heaven. But none of it mattered, because his daughter, Mandy, had never heard a single sound. Born deaf, she had never said a word, never laughed out loud, never heard her father whisper, "I love you." For 8 years, Tony tried everything: specialists from Boston to Tokyo, surgeries that cost more than most homes, endless prayers whispered into empty silence. Each time the verdict was the same: her condition is congenital, there's no cure. But Tony refused to accept that. He couldn't. His wife Allison had died the day Mandy was born. The doctors called it a complication. Tony called it the price of his success, a punishment he couldn't undo. Since that night, his world had become divided into two things: work and hope. Work to escape the guilt that haunted him. Hope to fix the one thing even money couldn't. What Tony didn't know was that the miracle he'd been searching the world for wasn't hiding in a hospital. It was about to come from someone he barely noticed, a woman who mopped his marble floors and prayed under her breath. Her name was Jennifer Stewart. No medical degree, no wealthy connections, just a woman doing her best to survive. But Jennifer noticed something about Mandy that no one else ever had. Something small, something dark, something that would change everything. And one night, while Tony was away, Jennifer made a decision that would either save that little girl's life or destroy her own. What happened next? You need to see it for yourself. But before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and which part of the story hit you the hardest. I believe this story found you today for a reason. The Gardner mansion rose above the Hudson like a palace of glass and silence. From the outside, it looked like perfection. But inside, there was no music, no laughter, no warmth, only the echo of what had been lost, and the faint rhythmic tapping of a child's small hand against her ear. Jennifer Stewart had worked in a lot of places: schools, hospitals, offices where people barely made eye contact, but she had never felt silence like this before. It wasn't peace. It was punishment. The first thing she learned her second week on the job was that laughter didn't belong here. The maids spoke in whispers. The groundskeepers moved like ghosts. Even the butler, who'd served Tony Gardner for a decade, walked on his toes. Mr. Gardner liked things quiet. Jennifer understood that kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a loss too heavy to name. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, slipping through the service entrance in her plain uniform. The house was always immaculate, yet the staff cleaned it like it was covered in invisible dust. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers sparkled, but the air was heavy, thick with something you couldn't polish away: grief. The Gardner family portraits lined the hallway, smiling faces frozen in oil and glass. There was Allison Gardner, Tony's late wife, her eyes the color of summer skies, her arms wrapped around a toddler with golden hair and a wide, curious smile. Little Mandy. Jennifer paused there often, dusting the same frame twice just to look at the child's eyes. She looked alive in the picture, full of light. But the little girl Jennifer saw each day wasn't like that anymore. The staff had learned how to move around Mandy without startling her. The cook placed her breakfast in front of her gently. The driver waited for her signal before opening the car door. Every noise, every motion, every vibration had to be calculated, softened, muted. To the workers, it was part of the job. To Jennifer, it was heartbreaking. She couldn't imagine growing up in a world so still. One afternoon, while polishing the staircase railing, she caught sight of Mandy sitting cross-legged on the floor in the sunroom. The child was tracing her finger over a puzzle, moving pieces into place with focused precision. Her blonde hair shimmered in the light like strands of gold, and her small hand occasionally drifted to her right ear, pressing against it gently before she went back to her puzzle. Jennifer paused mid-wipe, her chest tightening. That small, habitual touch. She'd seen it before. A twitch, a flinch, almost like pain. The other maids didn't notice. They kept their eyes on their tasks. But Jennifer couldn't look away. The girl was different. Not just because she was deaf, but because she seemed aware of her silence in a way most people never would be. Like she felt the world moving around her, but couldn't quite reach it. Days passed before Jennifer found a reason to approach her. It happened by accident, or maybe not. Mandy had been sitting on the library floor with her sketchbook, drawing shapes with colored pencils. A soft breeze from the open window swept through, scattering the pencils across the room. Jennifer was dusting nearby and instinctively bent down to help. The girl turned sharply, startled. Jennifer froze, holding up both hands as if to say, "It's okay?" Then she smiled, crouching low to collect the pencils without getting too close. She pointed at one that had rolled under the table. Mandy followed her gaze, crawled over, and picked it up. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, one woman trying not to intrude, one child trying to decide whether to trust her. Then, for the first time, Jennifer saw it. A flicker of something warm on Mandy's lips. A tiny smile. Jennifer smiled back, whispering softly, even though she knew the girl couldn't hear. "Thank you, sweetheart." Mandy didn't reply, but she reached into her sketchbook and began to draw. Her small hand moved quickly, confidently. A few moments later, she turned the page toward Jennifer. It was a picture of the sun, bright and round, with two figures beneath it, one tall, one small. They were holding hands. Jennifer felt her eyes sting. "Is that me?" she mouthed, tapping her chest. Mandy nodded shyly, then went back to coloring. That simple moment, quiet, wordless, pure, stayed with Jennifer all day. She had cleaned mansions before, served people who never learned her name, but this was different. This was connection. From then on, whenever Jennifer passed the sunroom, she'd find a new drawing on the table. One day it was a bird, another day the stars. Once, Mandy had drawn a woman in a blue dress standing beside her. Jennifer didn't need words to understand what the drawings meant. While that bond quietly formed in the background, Tony Gardner's life spun in circles of frustration. He spent mornings in boardrooms and afternoons in medical offices. His company made millions, but none of it mattered anymore. The only deal he cared about was the one he couldn't close, the one that would give his daughter her hearing. That week, he flew a specialist in from Boston, a renowned neurologist with an entourage of assistants and a resume worth its weight in gold. Tony sat across from the man in the private consultation room, the tension in his shoulders obvious even beneath his tailored suit. "Mr. Gardner," the doctor said gently, sliding a file across the desk, "I've reviewed the records, all of them. Your daughter's deafness isn't caused by trauma or infection. It's congenital. There's no procedure that can fix it." Tony stared at the floor, jaw tight. "There's always something that can be done," the doctor sighed. "I'm sorry. I know you've tried everything." Tony stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "I haven't tried everything. Not yet." But when he got home that night, even he knew he was lying to himself. He poured a drink and walked into his study. The walls were lined with awards, achievements, proof that he could fix or buy or build anything he wanted, except peace. He looked up at the portrait of Allison, the wife he'd lost. Her painted eyes followed him wherever he went. "I promised I'd fix her," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I promised." The clock on the mantel ticked softly, the same clock Mandy had never heard. By the third week, Jennifer knew the mansion's rhythm better than anyone, the timing of the security lights, the sound the floors made near the piano room, the moment when Mandy's nanny would leave her to nap in the afternoons. That's when she first heard it. A sound. Faint, small, but there. Jennifer had been mopping near the hallway outside Mandy's room. The house was unusually quiet, even for the Gardners. Tony was away at a meeting. The staff were in the kitchen. The only sound should have been the gentle swish of her mop. But then, something else. A soft, muffled hum, like someone trying to sing underwater. Jennifer froze, listening. It came again, a fragile, trembling noise followed by a tiny, frustrated whimper. She followed the sound to the open doorway of Mandy's playroom. The little girl sat on the rug, clutching her right ear with both hands. Her face was scrunched in pain. Tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes. Jennifer's heart dropped. She set the mop aside and crouched near the door. "Mandy?" she whispered automatically, though she knew the child couldn't hear her. When Mandy looked up, her face was pale. Jennifer moved slowly, hands raised to show she meant no harm. She pointed to her own ear, then to Mandy's. "Pain?" she signed awkwardly. Mandy nodded. Jennifer hesitated, unsure what to do. Then she noticed it, something deep inside the girl's ear, just barely visible when the light hit. A dark speck, shiny and unnatural. Her breath caught. "What is that?" she thought. She leaned a little closer, careful not to startle the girl. It wasn't earwax. It wasn't dirt. It looked like something that didn't belong there at all. Jennifer's pulse began to race. She thought of the years of tests, the endless specialists, the hopelessness Tony carried in his eyes. Could it really be that simple? Could something so small have stolen this child's entire world? She didn't know. She wasn't a doctor, but her instincts screamed that this mattered. That night, the mansion felt heavier than usual. Jennifer finished her shift quietly, her mind replaying what she'd seen over and over. The rest of the staff talked softly in the servants' kitchen, gossiping about Mr. Gardner's latest business deal. Jennifer barely heard them. She slipped outside for some air. The Hudson shimmered beneath the moonlight. The city lights flickered across the water, distant and unreachable. Her hands trembled as she gripped the railing of the terrace. This family lived in a world of marble and glass, where silence was something they could afford to maintain. But Jennifer came from a different world, a world of noise and struggle, of people who fixed what they could with what little they had. She thought of her mother, confined to a nursing home bed, the bills stacked like bricks on Jennifer's kitchen counter. She thought of her younger brother, gone too soon because they couldn't afford the care he needed. And then she thought of Mandy, the little girl who'd smiled at her over a handful of crayons. Jennifer couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mandy pressing her hands to her ear, that small face twisted in pain. At midnight, she sat up in bed, whispering to the dark. "If I'm right," she said, her voice shaking, "this could change everything. But if I'm wrong—" Her sentence trailed off. She didn't need to finish it. She stared at her calloused hands, the same hands that scrubbed floors and polished mirrors, and wondered how they could possibly hold a miracle. She reached for the small Bible that always sat on her nightstand. Its edges were frayed, its pages worn thin from years of prayers whispered in cleaning closets and bus rides home. She opened it to a verse she knew by heart. God doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. Jennifer let out a slow breath. Lord, she whispered, if you're showing me this, help me see it through. She closed her eyes and pressed her palms together. Outside, the city hummed with distant traffic. Somewhere across the river, a millionaire drank himself to sleep in a mansion full of silence. And in a small rented apartment across the bridge, a janitor prayed for the courage to break that silence forever. Jennifer couldn't shake the image of Mandy's face, the tiny hands pressed against her ear, the shimmer of tears that never fell. She spent the entire morning moving through the mansion on autopilot, her body working but her mind trapped in that moment. Every corner of the Gardner estate glistened with perfection, but to Jennifer it all felt like a cage. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was suffocating. At noon, Jennifer retreated to the staff locker room. The fluorescent light flickered weakly above her as she sat on the wooden bench, staring at her trembling hands. She whispered to the empty room, "You can't. You'll lose everything." Her own voice startled her. She was a janitor, not a doctor. She had no right to even touch that child. But what if she was right? What if the darkness she'd seen in Mandy's ear was the reason she couldn't hear? Jennifer pressed her palms together and lowered her head. "Lord," she murmured, her voice trembling, "if you're calling me, give me courage." Not for me, for her. The prayer hung in the air, quiet and desperate. When she lifted her head, she saw her reflection in the locker mirror. Tired eyes, a uniform smudged with cleaner, and the faintest trace of resolve in her expression. She'd been invisible her whole life, but maybe that's why she was meant to see what no one else did. She remembered another hospital, another hallway. Years ago, Jennifer had been 16, sitting beside her younger brother, Marcus, in a cheap emergency room in Newark. He was burning up, shaking, barely breathing. The nurses said they needed a specialist, but their insurance wouldn't cover it. Her mother had begged, pleaded, but the answer was the same. You'll have to wait. Marcus never made it through the night. Jennifer still remembered the stillness of his small body, the way her mother's cry had filled their apartment like a siren that never stopped ringing. That was the night Jennifer made a promise. She would never again stay silent when she could help, even if it cost her. Now, years later, a child was suffering again, and she was the only one who had noticed. That evening, the Gardner mansion was unusually busy. Tony was hosting a charity gala downtown, and the house buzzed with last-minute preparation. Drivers lined up at the gate, staff hurried through the halls. Jennifer stood by the staircase, wiping the railing for the third time, her stomach in knots. When the black car finally pulled away with Tony inside, silence returned. Heavy, absolute. She looked down the corridor leading to Mandy's room. Her heartbeat quickened. Then she heard it, that faint, muffled whimper again. Jennifer dropped the cloth and hurried toward the sound. In the playroom, Mandy sat on the rug, knees pulled to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. Her small fingers dug into her ear like she was trying to pull something out herself. Jennifer's breath caught. She rushed to the girl's side, kneeling on the floor. "It's okay, baby," she said softly, knowing the child couldn't hear her but saying it anyway. She gently touched Mandy's wrist, lowering her hands. Then she pointed to her own ear and signed, "May I?" Mandy hesitated, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Then, slowly, she nodded. Jennifer swallowed hard. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Jennifer moved quickly but carefully. She retrieved her cleaning cart from the hall and opened the small first-aid drawer where she kept sterilized tweezers. Her hands shook as she wiped them with alcohol. "Guide my hands, Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She knelt behind Mandy, tilting the girl's head gently toward the light streaming through the window. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. There it was again, that dark, solid mass deep inside the canal. Jennifer inhaled sharply, steadying herself. "Please let me be right." Slowly she inserted the tweezers, careful not to hurt the child. She felt resistance, a dense, foreign lump lodged too deep for comfort. Mandy flinched, gripping Jennifer's arm. "It's okay," Jennifer soothed, her voice breaking. "Just a second more." She tugged gently. Nothing. Her palms were slick with sweat. One wrong move and she could make things worse. She whispered again, "Please, God." Then she tried once more, slow, precise, unshakable. This time it moved. A faint gasp escaped Mandy's lips. Jennifer froze. She pulled again, heart hammering. The object shifted, then slid free with a soft, wet pop. It landed in her palm, dark, hardened, twisted with years of compacted wax and debris. For a second, the world went still. Jennifer stared at it, trembling. "Dear God!" Then she heard it, the ticking, that old grandfather clock in the hallway. A sound so familiar to Jennifer it nearly faded into the background. But to Mandy turned toward it, eyes wide as the ocean, her lips parted. "Tick." The word came out broken, uncertain, but real. Jennifer's breath caught. Her knees gave out, and she pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. "You can hear," she choked, tears spilling down her face. "You can hear." Mandy blinked in wonder, her hands touching her ears. Her hair, her face, like she couldn't believe her own body. Then came a soft, startled laugh, the first sound of joy that child had ever made. Jennifer reached out, pulling her into her arms, sobbing into her shoulder. "Thank you, Jesus," she whispered. "Thank you." For a few perfect seconds, time didn't exist. Jennifer felt light, free, as if God himself had stepped into that quiet room. Mandy laughed again, louder this time, startled by the sound of her own voice. She turned toward the window where the wind rattled the glass, and her eyes went wide with awe. "It's loud," she said, her voice shaky but full of wonder. Jennifer nodded, tears streaming down her face. "That's the world, baby. That's the world you've been missing." She took the dark blockage in her hand, staring at it in disbelief. Something so small had held back so much life. She wrapped it in a tissue and set it aside. Her hands were still shaking, but her heart was full. Fuller than it had been in years. She had done it. She'd followed her faith, and it had led to a miracle. The sound of laughter, real laughter, still echoed faintly in the room when the sharp creak of the door made Jennifer's heart stop. She turned. Tony Gardner stood in the doorway. His face was pale, his expression a mix of shock and terror. "What?" His voice broke. "What are you doing to my daughter?" Jennifer froze. The tweezers trembled in her hand. Mandy looked up, startled, the light still dancing in her eyes. Tony's gaze darted between the crying janitor, the laughing child, and the dark lump on the table. He didn't see the miracle. He saw a stranger's hands near his daughter's ear and the faint trace of blood on her neck. "Get away from her!" he shouted, rushing forward. Jennifer backed away, palms raised. "Sir, please." But Tony had already pulled Mandy into his arms, clutching her tightly. His eyes blazed with fear and fury. "What did you do to my daughter?" he roared. Mandy opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to say the words that would change everything. But Tony couldn't hear her over his own panic. Jennifer's heart shattered. The miracle she had prayed for had arrived, but it had come wrapped in misunderstanding. And as Tony called for security, Jennifer stood frozen, her tears silent, her prayer unfinished. Tony Gardner had walked into many rooms in his life, boardrooms, press conferences, gala stages, but never one that stopped his heart quite like this. There, in the middle of his daughter's playroom, stood Jennifer, the janitor, holding a metal tool in her shaking hand. Mandy sat on the rug, her eyes wide, tears still glistening on her cheeks. For Tony, time fractured. All he could see was his daughter's fear. All he could feel was the sharp, suffocating rush of panic. "What are you doing to my daughter?" he roared, his voice echoing through the hall. Jennifer spun around, startled, still clutching the tweezers. "Mr. Gardner, please, get away from her!" His voice cracked like thunder. Within seconds, 2 members of house security came running from the hallway. Tony pointed a trembling hand at Jennifer. "Take her out of here!" "Sir, please!" Jennifer cried, her voice trembling as she held up the tissue-wrapped object in her hand. "I didn't hurt her. Look! Please, just look!" But Tony didn't want to look. Couldn't. All he saw was a stranger kneeling beside his little girl, his child crying, a tool glinting under the chandelier light. He rushed forward, pulling Mandy into his arms. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here." Jennifer stepped back, desperate, tears streaking her face. "Mr. Gardner, she can hear you." Tony froze. For a moment those words cut through his anger. "What did you say?" he snapped. "She can hear," Jennifer insisted. "Please, sir, I swear." But before she could finish, Mandy screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that filled the room. Not the silent cry Tony had known for 8 long years, but a real, terrified scream. Tony's breath caught. His grip on Mandy tightened instinctively. But instead of hearing the miracle that had just happened, his mind twisted it into horror. His daughter, his deaf daughter, was screaming because she was in pain. He turned back to Jennifer, his face pale with rage. "What did you do to her?" Jennifer's voice broke. "She's not hurt. She's hearing you." But he wasn't listening anymore. "Get her out of my house," Tony barked. Security grabbed Jennifer by the arms as she struggled, pleading through her tears. "Please, Mr. Gardner, check her ears. Please, I was only trying to help." Mandy reached out, her small hand trembling, as if trying to stop them. But she didn't yet understand her own voice, her own new world of sound. By the time Tony carried her out of the room, Jennifer's sobs echoed down the corridor, unanswered. The Gardner mansion, once frozen in silence, erupted into chaos. The staff whispered behind closed doors. Security escorted Jennifer to the guest quarters and locked her inside until the police could arrive. The house manager tried to ask Tony what had happened, but he brushed everyone aside. He only had one thought: get Mandy to the hospital. The driver sped through the night, city lights streaking past as Tony held his daughter close. Her little fingers clutched his suit jacket, and for the first time she was crying audibly. Every sound tore through him, every whimper, every breath. "Shh," he whispered, brushing her hair back. "Daddy's got you. I'm gonna fix this." At the hospital, he stormed through the entrance like a man possessed. "I need Dr. Reynolds," he barked. "Now!" Within minutes, Mandy was surrounded by nurses and doctors. Tony paced the hallway outside the examination room, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Was this woman insane? What kind of person touches a child like that? Then he heard the door open. The lead physician, a gray-haired man who had treated Mandy since infancy, stepped into the hall. "Mr. Gardner," he said quietly, "you might want to sit down." Tony didn't move. "Is she all right?" The doctor hesitated. "She's fine. More than fine." Tony blinked. "What does that mean?" The doctor smiled faintly, disbelief in his eyes. "Her hearing has returned." Tony froze. "That's not possible." "I thought so too," the doctor said. "But we ran the tests twice. Both ears are fully functional. The obstruction that was blocking her canal is gone." Tony's throat went dry. "Obstruction?" "Yes," the doctor replied, flipping open the chart. "A hardened blockage. It had likely been building for years. Once removed, it restored the normal function of the ear." Tony stumbled back a step, his heart racing. "Are you saying she can hear?" The doctor nodded. "Perfectly." Tony gripped the back of a chair, trying to steady himself. His mind flashed back to the playroom, to Jennifer, to the tool in her hand, to Mandy's scream. She had been trying to tell him. Tony followed the doctor into his office, where medical files were spread across the desk. "How did this happen?" he demanded. "How could every specialist miss something like this?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Gardner, may I be honest?" "Please." The man sighed, pulling out a printed scan, an MRI image of Mandy's inner ear. "This was taken 6 years ago. You probably don't remember, but at the time, your insurance was managed through a private medical partnership." Tony frowned. "I remember." The doctor pointed to a small note on the chart. "Obstruction noted. Follow-up procedure recommended." "There was a recommendation for a simple outpatient cleaning procedure," the doctor continued. "But it was never scheduled." Tony's voice hardened. "Why not?" The doctor hesitated. "Because your provider opted instead for ongoing auditory therapy, more profitable in the long term." For a moment the words didn't register. Then they did, all at once. Tony's knees nearly buckled. "You're saying they knew? They knew this was the problem, and they didn't tell me?" The doctor nodded grimly. "It seems so. I'm sorry, Mr. Gardner. I truly am." Tony turned away, staring at the sterile white wall. His reflection shimmered in the hospital glass. A man who'd built an empire yet failed his own child. 8 years. 8 years of silence, of therapy bills, of traveling the world in search of hope that was sitting right in front of him. And all that time, people had profited off his pain. He thought of the charity galas, the $1 million donations, the doctors who smiled as they took his checks, the people who promised progress but never gave him truth. He had trusted them, and they had turned his daughter's suffering into a business. Tony's chest heaved. "All this time," he whispered, his voice cracking, "all that money, and she was suffering because of me." The doctor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You couldn't have known." But Tony shook his head, eyes wet. "I should have. I should have seen her. I should have listened." He turned toward the glass where Mandy sat in the next room, headphones resting around her neck, giggling softly at the sound of her own laughter. For the first time in years, she wasn't silent. And the man who had spent millions to bring her peace stood there, realizing that it hadn't been medicine or money that gave her this miracle. It had been the faith of a woman he'd just thrown out of his house. Tony closed his eyes. He had misjudged the only person who had truly seen his daughter, and now he had to make it right. The drive back to the mansion felt longer than it ever had before. The city lights blurred past Tony's window, but he barely saw them. The weight pressing on his chest was heavier than guilt. It was the truth. He'd spent 8 years trying to buy back his daughter's silence, and in doing so he'd missed the sound of everything that mattered. His empire, his fortune, his reputation, none of it could drown out the echo of his daughter's first word, or the fact that the only person who had truly helped her was sitting alone, probably terrified, in a locked room under his roof. The car rolled to a stop outside the Gardner estate. Tony didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He stepped out into the cold night, the wind cutting through his tailored suit like punishment. The mansion stood silent against the dark, its windows reflecting nothing but his failure. Inside, the staff scattered when they saw him. No one dared speak. Word had already spread about the hospital, the miracle, the truth. Tony ignored them all. He walked straight past the grand staircase, through the marble corridor, to the far end of the house where the guest quarters were. A security guard stood by the door. Tony waved him off. "Leave us." The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. When the door creaked open, Jennifer Stewart was standing by the window, her uniform wrinkled, eyes red and swollen. She had been crying. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers twisting nervously. She looked small, fragile, and yet, Tony thought, stronger than anyone he'd ever known. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The air between them was heavy, charged with everything that had been broken and everything that was about to be made right. Tony took a step forward. Jennifer flinched, expecting the worst. "Mr. Gardner," she began, her voice trembling. "If you're here to press charges, But before she could finish, Tony fell to his knees. Her words caught in her throat. "Sir, what are you—" "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. "You saved her." Jennifer froze. The sight of this powerful man kneeling before her, this man who could buy anything in the world, broke her in ways she didn't expect. Tears filled her eyes again. "Please get up." But Tony didn't move. He looked up at her, his face raw, his composure gone. "All this time I thought I could fix everything. That money could make it right. But you—" his voice faltered. "You did what I couldn't. You gave me back my little girl." Jennifer shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "I just did what anyone with faith would do." "No," Tony said softly. "You did what I couldn't. You believed." For a long moment, silence filled the room, gentle this time, not suffocating, the kind that comes when two people finally understand each other. Jennifer stepped closer. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Gardner. I didn't do it for money or for praise." Tony's eyes glistened. "Then why?" "Because someone had to," she said quietly. "Because I saw a little girl who'd been forgotten, not just by the doctors, but by everyone who was supposed to protect her. I couldn't walk away." Tony swallowed hard. "I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was giving her the best." "You gave her everything money could buy," Jennifer said gently, "but not the one thing she needed most, someone to truly see her." Her words hit him like a revelation. Tony dropped his gaze, ashamed. "I was too busy trying to fix her. I never stopped to love her as she was." Jennifer placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You love her. You always have. You just needed to stop searching for miracles in the wrong places." Tony looked up at her, his eyes wet. "How can you forgive me? I accused you. I don't need an apology," she said softly. All I need is for you to listen, really listen, to her, to the world, to yourself." He nodded slowly, taking in every word. The next morning the mansion came alive again, but not with noise, with purpose. Tony called his legal team and medical advisors into the boardroom. What followed was short and brutal. "You're all dismissed," he said coldly. "Every single one of you who knew." They tried to explain contracts, procedures, obligations, but Tony raised a hand to silence them. "You turned my daughter's suffering into a business," he said, his voice steady but laced with fury. "You made her pain profitable. That ends today." By noon, the entire medical partnership was terminated. Tony called a press conference, publicly exposing the negligence that had stolen years of his daughter's life. It made headlines across New York. "Millionaire exposes medical scandal after daughter's miracle recovery." But none of that mattered to him. Not anymore. All he cared about was the small girl sitting in the garden, listening to birds for the first time, and the woman standing nearby, who had given him back not just his child, but his faith. Later that evening, Tony found Jennifer in the same spot where they'd first spoken, the hallway outside the playroom. "I fired them all," he said quietly. "Every doctor, every consultant. They'll never do this to another family again." Jennifer nodded. "Good." He hesitated, then asked, "How did you know? How did you see what no one else did?" Jennifer looked at him with calm certainty. "I didn't. God did. I just listened." Tony stared at her, humbled. She smiled faintly. "You see, Mr. Gardner, God doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen." The words sank deep into him, steady and absolute. He had spent his life surrounded by experts, people with credentials, experience, status. Yet the person who had performed the greatest miracle he'd ever witnessed was a woman the world barely noticed. That night, Tony found himself standing outside Mandy's room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, his daughter sat by the window, listening intently to the soft chirping of crickets beyond the glass. Her small shoulders rose and fell with every breath. The world was alive around her now, vibrant, loud, beautiful. Jennifer stood nearby, her uniform neat again, her face calm. Tony stepped inside quietly. "Mr. Gardner," Jennifer said softly, straightening, "I was just checking on her. She fell asleep listening to the sounds." Tony looked down at his daughter. "She used to cry at night because the silence scared her," he whispered. "Now she won't sleep because she's afraid to miss the world." Jennifer smiled. "That's a good problem to have." Tony turned to her, emotion thick in his throat. "Jennifer, I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," she said. "You believed." He nodded slowly, then extended his hand. "Come with me," he said. She frowned. "Where?" Tony smiled, eyes glistening. "Let's go see her." And when Jennifer took his hand, the last traces of fear, guilt, and silence lifted from the Gardner mansion. For the first time, the air was warm again, not from wealth or luxury, but from grace. Morning came like a whisper, soft, tender, and alive. For the first time in 8 years, the Gardner mansion did not wake to silence. It woke to sound, the faint chirping of sparrows in the trees, the gentle creak of the floorboards as sunlight spilled across the marble hallways, the rush of the Hudson's current far below, brushing against the rocks like a song that had waited years to be heard. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a little girl's laugh filled the air, light, astonished, and free. Mandy Gardner sat on the edge of her bed, her small hands gripping the sheets, her wide blue eyes darting around the room. Every noise was a discovery. the flutter of the curtains, the faint buzz of a fly, her own breathing, the rhythm of life itself. She pressed her palms over her ears, then lifted them again, amazed at how the world changed with one small motion. Her father had told her she'd be able to hear now, but words couldn't have prepared her for this, for the orchestra of existence that surrounded her. When the door opened, she turned quickly toward the sound. Tony stood in the doorway, frozen. For a second he couldn't move. His little girl, the child he'd prayed for, cried for, spent millions on, was looking right at him, and she had heard the door open. Mandy smiled. "Daddy." It was one word, just one, but it broke him. Tony covered his face, his shoulders trembling as tears fell freely. He crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her into his arms, clutching her like he would never let go again. "I hear you," he choked out. "I hear you, sweetheart." Mandy giggled, startled by the sound of her father's voice so close to her ear. "You're loud," she said, laughing again. Tony laughed, too, the sound rough and beautiful, his voice breaking. "I can fix that." But he didn't want to fix anything anymore. Not the noise, not the world, not even himself. For the first time in years, he didn't need to. He spent the morning following her from room to room, like a man discovering life for the first time. Mandy pressed buttons on toys she'd never heard before. They sang, beeped, and played music. She shrieked with delight. She ran to the window and listened to the wind shake the trees, then covered her ears and laughed again. Tony could barely keep up. Every laugh felt like a gift, every sound a second chance. At one point, she stopped near the piano in the great room. She ran her fingers along the keys. The first note she struck made her jump, a pure, resonant sound that filled the space and echoed through the marble hall. "Music," Tony said softly. "That's music, baby." She pressed another key and another, then turned to him, grinning. "It's pretty," she whispered. He nodded, his throat tight. "It is." It was more than pretty. It was everything he'd ever wanted. By noon, the mansion was awake in a way it hadn't been in years. Staff members whispered in astonishment, some crying quietly as they watched Mandy run through the halls, chasing the echoes of her own laughter. Jennifer stood by the service door, suitcase in hand. Her shift had technically ended hours ago, but she had stayed to make sure Mandy was all right. Now that the girl was safe, she knew it was time to leave. She'd done her part. The miracle wasn't hers to hold, only to deliver. She set her small suitcase by the door and took one last look at the house. The light pouring in through the windows made it seem warmer somehow, softer. The silence that had once haunted it was gone. Jennifer smiled faintly. "Thank you," she whispered. She reached for the doorknob. "Going somewhere?" The voice behind her made her jump. She turned. Tony Gardner stood in the doorway of the hall, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Gardner," she said quickly, lowering her gaze, "I was just leaving." "Without saying goodbye?" he asked gently. Jennifer hesitated. "I didn't want to make things awkward. You've got your family back, and I didn't want to be in the way." Tony walked closer, his footsteps echoing softly against the tile. "Jennifer, stop." She froze. He took a slow breath, searching for the right words. "You gave me my daughter back," he said quietly. "You gave me hope." Jennifer shook her head. "I didn't give you anything, sir. God did." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but he sent you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to help." "You did more than help," Tony said. "You did what no doctor, no specialist, no hospital in the world could do. You believed when I couldn't. You acted when no one else dared. That's not something I'll ever forget." Jennifer tried to speak, but emotion choked her voice. "Mr. Gardner, I never wanted credit. I only wanted Mandy to live her life the way God intended." Tony nodded. "And because of you, she will." For a long moment they stood in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind that used to haunt this house. It was peaceful, full. Tony took a deep breath. "Jennifer," he said finally, "I can't let you walk away. Not like this." She frowned slightly. "Sir, I appreciate everything, but I really don't need—" He held up a hand. "No, this isn't charity, it's purpose. This family needs people like you, not just because of what you did for Mandy, but because of who you are." Jennifer blinked, confused. "What are you saying?" "I'm offering you a position here," Tony said. "Not as a janitor, as part of Mandy's care team. Her world is changing fast, and she'll need someone with patience, faith, and heart. You've already proven you have all three." Jennifer stared at him, stunned. "You'd really want me to stay after everything that happened?" Tony's smile was soft but sure. "Jennifer, I don't want you to stay. I need you to." She covered her mouth, trying not to cry again. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply. She let out a shaky laugh. "Yes." Tony exhaled, smiling for the first time in what felt like years. "Good. Then let's make this house a home again." That evening the sun dipped low over the Hudson, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The Gardner mansion glowed with life, lights flickering on, voices echoing faintly, the soft hum of music drifting from the piano room. Mandy sat in the garden between her father and Jennifer. The three of them watched as the wind stirred the chimes that hung from the porch. The sound was delicate, almost ethereal, a melody carried on the breeze. Mandy tilted her head, listening intently. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jennifer smiled, her eyes shining. "Yes, baby, that's the sound of grace." Tony looked at them both. His daughter, his miracle, and the woman who had restored everything he thought he'd lost. For the first time in his life, he understood what grace really meant. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't power, it was love, unearned, unexpected, and utterly life-changing. The wind shifted, and the chimes rang louder, dancing with the laughter that now filled the air. Mandy turned toward her father again, curiosity gleaming in her eyes. "Daddy, can I play the piano?" He chuckled. "You can do anything you want now, sweetheart." She ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the halls. Tony and Jennifer followed side by side. Inside, Mandy climbed onto the piano bench. She pressed a single key. The note rang out, pure and bright. Jennifer smiled. "She's starting her own song." Tony nodded, his eyes wet. "She's always had one, we just couldn't hear it before." And so, for the first time in years, the Gardner mansion was filled with sound, laughter, music, and the unshakable echo of a miracle born not from wealth or science, but from faith, love, and one woman's courage to act when no one else would. The silence was gone. Grace had taken its place. If you loved this story, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and which part of the story hit you the hardest. We've got more powerful, emotional stories coming your way, and trust me, you don't want to miss them.